begin this news hour in Belarus, where key members of the opposition have gone on trial in absentia. The 5 accused, including the opposition leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, have all been living abroad since fleeing after mass protests in 2020 failed to topple President Alexander Lukashenko. There's been a whole series of political trials in Belarus in the past few weeks for prominent journalists and human rights activists. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya has called this a sham trial, accusing the country's authoritarian leader of being unable to get over the trauma of 2020, when there were mass peaceful protests against his re-election. She's now facing 10 charges, including plotting to overthrow the regime and creating an extremist group. 4 other opposition leaders are being tried too, including the former culture minister.
This Lukashenko's regime not sure in people. He is not sure that if even he sends Belarusian troops or army alongside with the Russian army to Ukraine, that Belarusian people will not change the sides, will not hide, will not betray. Yeah. So that's why this status quo is comfortable for Lukashenko and comfortable for Putin. I doubt that possible attack can take place like on land, but missiles can be launched from Belarusian territory at any moment. Putin also knows that Belarusian people are against Lukashenko, and this possible participation of Belarusian troops could raise unpredictable consequences.
And that's Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya there talking as that trial begins in Minsk in Belarus. Now, Arise Chief Correspondent John Cookson has been monitoring the story, and he joins us now from London for more. Good to see you, John. So, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, the woman who may well have won that disputed presidential election in Belarus in 2020, has been put on trial on treason charges. Tell us more about that trial in Minsk, which has been called a special proceeding. I understand the charges are extremely serious.
They are, Charles, and treason is of course very serious, and as you say, if found guilty, she faces 15 years in jail. But look, this all goes back to the presidential race in 2020. Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus with an iron fist since 1994. So you can be sure he wasn't going to lose the election in 2020 to an upstart from the party headed by Tsikhanouskaya. And the poll results, of which the opposition called was a rigged election, came out as 80% for Lukashenko and 7% for Tsikhanouskaya. And that caused a mass unrest, mass protests in Minsk and elsewhere immediately afterwards, and Ms. Tsikhanouskaya had to go into exile in Vilnius in Lithuania and effectively ran an opposition in exile. And so this is what peeved Lukashenko, and he's instituted this trial for treason, calling for her to be jailed over the mass protests. Now, she's responded and said that this is the work of a pathetic dictator. Indeed, Western critics call Lukashenko Europe's last dictator. And she may be right. Other people on trial, as you already said, there are other opposition leaders, including Pavel Tushka, and also a Nobel Peace Laureate Alice Bielski, who faces 12 years in jail. Also facing proceedings is Ms. Tsikhanouskaya's husband, who's a blogger. He's already in jail, facing charges. So this is a real crackdown. They aren't the only people in jail, Charles. There are 1,500, no less, 1,500 people waiting trial who were arrested back in 2020. And Lukashenko now cracking down on them in a big way.
Well, absolutely. And as you said, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya has denounced this trial, calling it a mockery of justice and a revenge on all those Belarusians who stood up for justice and freedom in 2020. And this, as you said, is just the latest trial against those in exile. Is it your sense, John, that the government in Belarus is worried about voices from outside stirring up trouble in Belarus?
I think Lukashenko has to be. Look, dictators live in a world of their own, as we know, and they tend not to brook any trouble from troublesome protesters. But this is a different case slightly in the sense that Belarus is in a war zone now. Belarus is a keen supporter of Russia. And I think the last thing that Lukashenko wants at the moment is trouble at home, because Ms. Tsikhanouskaya has promised that if this trial goes ahead, and it is in effect a sham trial, there will be mass protests again in Belarus. And she surely does have a command to do that and able to do that. So I'm just wondering whether the President Lukashenko actually wants any more difficulties on his plate. He's trying to keep Putin happy, allowing Russian troops to train in Belarus, and indeed there are joint training operations, military training operations going on at least until February the 1st. So the regime in Belarus might be troubled by the possibility of more mass protests on the streets of cities like Minsk.
Meanwhile, though, John, I mean, the world seems to have forgotten Belarus whilst all attention is focused on Ukraine. I mean, that can't be very pleasant news for those people who fought against the Lukashenko.
Yes, and not only that. I mean, there is the possibility, and experts have been talking behind the scenes about Belarus actually joining Russia in this war against Ukraine. And that will be indeed a massive uptick in the hot war that's going on in the region. Now, whether Lukashenko actually would go that far, we'll have to wait and see. But we don't know what pressure Putin is putting on him to do that. As I said, Putin already has his troops trained in joint missions with Belarus, and indeed the invasion of Ukraine last year came from the north as well as from the south. From the north, I mean, through Belarus. So Russian troops used Belarus as a jumping off point.
John, thank you very much indeed, and thank you also for your coverage of all the Nigerians trooping to Chatham House this week. I mean, I know you've done an interview with the head of Nigeria's Electoral Commission, which will be coming up later in this program. John Cookson, Arise chief correspondent, talking to me there from London.